This video is now in session, and today we're going to be doing a little bit different than normal. This is not as much of a politically related video, but ultimately population shifts can dictate the future of politics. So since we have a lot of cities to go through with population declines and as well as population gains, let's start off with New York. So New York is one of the places that is decreasing in population, and while this has been accelerated by the pandemic, this has been happening for several decades at this point. Ever since the 1960s, the New York area has been decreasing in population, and it can be attributed to multiple factors, including the simplest answer, which is that New Yorkers just want to try something new, and as a result, they're moving out of New York. But it can also be attributed to the fact that in New York taxes are rising, like the taxes are too high, the rent is too high, wealthy people are being taxed more, and as a result they want to move out. And simply said, the industries in New York are starting to decline. The only two industries left in New York that actually have some viability is the financial industry. Wall Street is still doing well in New York, and then the West Side, where tech companies are growing. But besides those two industries, New York as a whole has been decreasing. So with the pandemic accelerating these declines, New York is now at a pivotal point. I don't know why I can't say that word, pivotal point. Where they have to decide what kind of future that they want, and that's where the 2021 New York City mayoral election comes in, and that's where politics comes in. We have multiple Democratic candidates who are bringing out different messages as to what the future of New York should be. Andrew Yang believes that New York should be the place for small businesses, for entrepreneurship in the future, and going back to its old roots where it was based on small businesses. Eric Adams, meanwhile, is taking the Biden approach of building back better, which means that he wants New York to go back to its old glory that was like 2 decades ago, and then some. And then you have progressive candidates who are saying that we have to pay attention to the underserved communities of New York in order to help them, and thus get the entirety of New York into a stronger place with higher salaries on average, and as well as better working conditions. So there is so while New York is decreasing in population, it's not like it's going to go extinct anytime soon, and there is a lot of thoughts as to what the future of New York should be, and 2021 ultimately will start to decide, or will start to make those decisions on the future. Moving down south, we have Baltimore. Baltimore is another place that is decreasing in population, and it's mainly attributed to the fact that a lot of industries are moving out of Baltimore, and a lot of underserved communities are not getting served. So for Baltimore, the only industries left are really the pharmaceutical industries, and possibly the U.S. Army still contributes a little bit to Baltimore, and as well as Johns Hopkins University. But besides those three things, it's really becoming less and less of a less of a great place to work at, and crime rates are ultimately rising in Baltimore, which is causing a lot of people to move from Baltimore over to Virginia, and this is a place that is growing. Now, in terms of Baltimore, it's unlikely that it's going to regain its former glory, just because only because Washington and the Virginia suburbs are growing at a very quick pace. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be room for both of these places to grow, so this place is the Virginia suburbs is the place that is growing, and Baltimore is the place that is decreasing in population. For the Virginia suburbs, this is mainly because a lot of companies are establishing offices at Washington, mainly so that they can have better access to lobbying Congress for changes to laws, or for a lack of change to laws. We have tech companies moving over to Washington to establish lobbying to establish lobbying positions. And Amazon is an example. Jeff Bezos bought a multi-million-dollar home in Washington, and as well as is establishing a base in Crystal City in the Arlington region. And he's mainly doing that so that he can get better access to Capitol Hill, so that he can communicate with people of Congress, so that Congress doesn't put harsh bills against Jeff Bezos or Amazon. And that's just one of numerous examples that is leading to the population growth in the Virginia suburbs. And it used to be that the Virginia suburbs would be around here, but now it's heavily expanding. It's going all the way down south past Stafford, and it's going to Fredericksburg at this point. And you can see that that's a very big jump, and that's a sign of Washington's growth. And continuing down south, it gets even better for the south at this point, at least for the southeast, where in the Research Triangle in North Carolina, there are a lot of people who are moving over to North Carolina, especially younger people, millennials and Generation Zers. And the main reason why is because of education and as well as tech companies and pharmaceutical companies. So in the Research Triangle, there are multiple universities like UNC Chapel Hill, Duke University, and as well as North Carolina State University in Raleigh. So because of these three universities, a lot of tech companies and a lot of pharmaceutical companies are establishing a base at this area where there are a lot of young people and a lot of great talent to then grow companies. So big tech companies like Apple are moving over, and then pharmaceutical companies are moving over, and that's ultimately contributing to a growth in the Research Triangle. This continues on even further down south with Atlanta. Atlanta is growing in population as Atlanta has been a much more developed city than before, and it's continuing to develop with, again, more tech companies, but there's also already an established set of companies like Coca-Cola and Delta that are providing a lot of jobs for Atlanta and for a lot of people to move over to Atlanta. And in Southwest Florida, this is also another place that's heavily growing. It's one of the fastest growing places in the United States, and this isn't as much of tech companies and pharmaceutical companies as it is about retirements. A lot of people are finding Florida a good place to retire, and as a result, they're moving over from the Rust Belt and from the Bible Belt over to Southwest Florida to have a good retirement area. And as a result, this place is also growing. Now, speaking of the Rust Belt and the Bible Belt, these are population areas that are decreasing. Pittsburgh, Detroit, these all had industries, automobile industries, and Pittsburgh had pharmaceutical industries, but now it's decreasing in population with these companies moving out, and with the lack of capital to reestablish these cities as a prosperous growing area. And that is also replicated in Chicago, where a lot of companies are moving out of Chicago in favor of the South and as well as the Sun Belt, as those are growing regions where younger people are moving to. A lot of times, if a certain set of young population wants to move over to some place, then a company will also move there to attract that kind of talent, and as a result, those places grow even further. And the inverse happens in these places that are declining, like Chicago. And Birmingham is another example of declining population, with younger people moving out to Atlanta and as well as to Texas, and older people moving out to Florida. So Birmingham is an area that is decreasing in population, and this is very indicative of much of the Bible Belt in this area that has been decreasing in population. It's become a less attractive place to live at and to raise the family, and thus is becoming less of a place for people to move to. And Texas is one of the places constantly mentioned as to where a lot of these decline centers where these people are moving to. A lot of people from New York, Birmingham, Chicago are moving over to Texas and the Texas Triangle. And the Texas Triangle is a region of Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, Austin, and San Antonio. In this region, a lot of tech companies are moving over to these areas, and a lot of high-profile tech companies are moving to these to Austin, especially, and as well as Houston and Dallas. And it's mainly because taxes in Texas are lower than in the well-established tech regions like California, and California taxes are constantly increasing. So as a result, it's becoming less favorable for companies to work in those areas, and thus they're moving to Texas, which has less regulations, less taxes, and ultimately populations are increasing as a result. And it's again, it's much of the younger population that is moving over to Texas rather than the older population, and that means that Texas will be prosperous for, at this point, decades to come, with a and it shows in the housing markets. It shows in Austin, where the housing prices have been increasing drastically. Same thing in Dallas Fort Worth, where there are a lot of new homes being built, and in Houston, a lot of existing homes are being renovated, and the overall population of Houston is growing and venturing further out to the suburbs. So Texas is going to be a place that is growing for years to come, with companies like SpaceX, as well as Apple and and Adobe moving over to Texas. And this is replicated along the Sun Belt, with Phoenix having the same kind of growth. A lot of people moving from California over to Arizona because of lower taxes, and as well as Phoenix being more of a developing area rather than a developed and saturated area. Phoenix has a lot of room to grow, literally and figuratively, and as a result, a lot of people are moving over to Phoenix. And this kind of story is replicated along Denver and Salt Lake City. In Denver, a lot of people are moving there for the same reasons as Phoenix. It's a developing area. There's a lot of land to be developed, and it's generally a nice place to it's a nice place to live and to establish a family. Crime rates in both of these cities are low, and housing rates are not exorbitantly high. Obviously, they will be because people are moving over to these places, but as of now, housing prices are not high. For Salt Lake City and Boise, Idaho, these are actually two pretty these are areas you wouldn't expect population centers to grow, but they are, and that's mainly because of the pandemic. With the pandemic, a lot of tech companies and a lot of big companies are telling their employees that they are free to move out of the established areas like New York, and as well as the Bay Area and Los Angeles, and they're free to work remotely. And as a result, a lot of people are moving over to Salt Lake City and Boise, Idaho. These are two places that are developing, and they're not entirely urban areas, which is very favorable to a lot of people who want to escape the madness of a city. So Salt Lake City and Boise, Idaho have been growing in population, and tech companies have noted this by moving over to these places. They've moved over to Salt Lake City, more specifically over to South Jordan and West Jordan. This area is a very quickly growing area, and these two places will definitely have growing populations for years to come. And finally, we have California. California is a mixed bag because it has been plateauing in population, but it has a mass exchange of where population centers are declining and growing. So in the Bay Area and in Los Angeles, population centers are decreasing, while in Sacramento and San Diego, which are near these two places, populations are increasing. And it's no coincidence that these two places are right next to the Bay Area and as well as the LA area. Historically speaking and currently speaking, the Bay Area is a very expensive place to live at, and so is Los Angeles, and it's become a very saturated place in terms of development. So a lot of people are moving out of San Francisco and Los Angeles, not only to these places in the West, but also to less developed cities in California, like Sacramento and San Diego, so that they can have lower housing prices and they can still work in California. So those are the population declines and those are the population increases. Ultimately, this means that this is just mainly a reshuffling of where people are living in the United States, and we'll cover this more in future videos as to how this impacts political elections and as well as politics in certain states. So that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.